I wish you could float through the sky, glowing in the dark, speed torpedo-like through a sparkling stream, or brave the frost for a crunchy breakfast. Sadly, all beyond our powers. We are only human, but there are plenty of animals out there with these superpowers and more. And they are on tonight's Winter Watch. Hello and welcome to WinterWatch 2021. Gusts of about 35 miles an hour, I think, here at the moment. It's our second programme in a run of 2 weeks this year. And if you were watching last night, you'll know that we've adjusted our mission slightly, not just to bring you the very best of British wildlife, but to capture some of the winter magic of nature and transport it from the wild and windy outdoors through your windows into your homes to put a smile on your face in these pretty stressful times. Now, I was tidying up the office today and something put a smile on my face. It was this skull that I found. I hadn't been looking at it for a long time. In fact, I'd lost it. It's the skull of a dolphin, and you can tell that here, look, it's got these little peg-like teeth down the bottom of its long beak here. And of course, I love this for its anatomy, its beautiful natural architecture. But the romantic in me also yearns to know where this dolphin went and what it did. And one thing I can tell you it definitely did was have a bulbous organ called a melon on the front of its head here, through which it would have focused clicks, allowing it to echolocate, allowing this animal to effectively see in murky water or see in the dark. And that is undeniably, I think, a superpower. And animal superpowers are the theme of our programme tonight. And thankfully, you've contributed yourselves. Take a look at this. We got this photograph from Phil Corley in Dorset, and it shows a wasp spider. Now, this is a large species of spider, first found in the UK at the beginning of the last century, now found south of a line between the Severn and the Wash. But this one is munching a lizard. It's a spider, an invertebrate, eating a vertebrate. And that's very rare in the UK. Occasionally, we've seen tiny little toadlets, perhaps accidentally caught in spiders' webs. But that is a spider of repute. Iolo, what do you think? That's a super spider to start off a programme about animals with superpowers, surely?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty gruesome as well, Chris. But I have for you, look at this, I have for you a fungus that's got the power to pull branches together and then to glue them there. It's called the hazel glue fungus, and it moves around canopies of hazel trees by gluing branches together. And I've seen this in the hazel woodlands up on the Isle of Mull. And it's also called the glue crust fungus. But to me, that sounds like a nasty disease. Gillian, what have you got for us down in Cornwall?
Well, from a superpower fungus to something a bit more familiar. And beavers, they have multiple superpowers, but let's just take a sneak preview at one of them. This is the paddle-like tail used for propulsion, but also used as a fat store. So they start the winter with 60% of fat in that tail, and by the end of the winter they lose about 3/4 of it. But this is the real superpower. The tail hardly shrinks. The fat gets replaced by water, so it carries on being this handy paddle right the way through the winter. I think that's a pretty cool superpower.
I wouldn't deny that, Gillian. I tell you, I'd like a tail like that, particularly with all the flooding that we've got down here at the moment in the New Forest. Thank you very much for sending in those photographs. If you do get any whilst you're out on your wild and windy winter walks, we'd love to see them. Please post them on our Twitter, Instagram and Facebook accounts. And also do take a look at our webpage where we've got our winter watch list running. We're asking you to spot various things that are out there. Last night we were focusing on missel thrushes, for instance, and also some of those fungi. You can check that out. Now, down here in the New Forest, we've got plenty of live cameras looking at the action out in the woods behind me. We've already seen foxes and badgers. Last night, we also saw this. a pair of fallow deer out in the woods. Remember, we're watching these animals in total darkness using infrared. Now they're down probably after acorns. They will browse and they will graze, are looking for all sorts of nutrition to get them through the winter, but sometimes struggling to do that. But really nice to see those. We don't only have live cameras down here in the New Forest though, we also have them up in Scotland on the banks of the River Ness, which, as you can imagine, is leading into Loch Ness itself. Very picturesque, of course, because, and at this time of year, in full spate. Lots of melting water, lots of water there in the river. A fantastic place for us to have our cameras. And earlier today, we spotted this because we found a dipper. Look at this. What a chubby little chap there, perched on a rock. This is a songbird. It's the only songbird which dives beneath the water. Don't ask me why they dip. There are all sorts of theories as to why dippers dip and also why wagtails wag. But great to see. But the real reason that we have those cameras up there on the banks of and beneath the surface of the River Ness is to look for the salmon. And Iolo got us started talking about these last night. He told us about their incredible life cycle and also focused on the males. Well, tonight we're going to be taking a look at the females. And it was always thought, I was certainly brought up to think, that once a female salmon had returned from the sea and spawned, she would die. And in fact, 90 to 95% of those do, but not all of them. Take a look at this fish. This is a fish that we know as an individual. We know that because of the patterns on its side. And here you can see that female swimming over its red, those rocks, that gravel, into which she's going to scatter her eggs. Flicking her tail, stirring them up, nestling down, squirting those eggs out, hoping a male will be there to fertilise them. But what we know, because we know this fish as an individual, is that this is not the first time she spawned this year. This is in fact the third time that she has spawned this year, in one season. And furthermore, Chris's studies, Chris Conroy, the guy who is working very closely with us up here, has also discovered through looking at fish scales that sometimes these fish are able to return to the sea, survive, and then come back to spawn not just a second time, but even a third time. In 2016, he recovered a scale from a fish, which is like a fingerprint, and it was the third time that this female had come back to spawn. And this is great stuff, isn't it? Because it means as scientists like Chris and others learn more and more about these animals, we do stand a far better chance of conserving them. And the Atlantic salmon is a species in trouble. And lots of fishermen and scientists are doing everything they can to lead to their recovery. But there are still mysteries, of course. Have a look at this, and I'm going to be quiet. You just look and listen to this female salmon. What about that? Listening to a salmon beneath the surface. I like that sort of stuff. That's my sort of connection with nature. But what do we think was actually going on? Well, I'll tell you what, let's rerun it again and take a second look. Well, we spoke to Chris, of course, and we also spoke to Professor Colin Bean at the University of Glasgow and Professor Jonathan Gray at Lancaster University, and they think that this fish is replenishing its swim bladder. Now, all bony fish have a swim bladder. It's a sort of a buoyancy aid. It keeps them at a certain depth in the water. If they didn't have it, they'd expend too much energy swimming down to that depth or preventing themselves from floating to the surface. And these particular fish, salmon, have a physostomus, got to get that right, physostomus swim bladder. And that means that it's fed from their alimentary tract, their gut. So if they take a gulp of air, a little tube feeds that air into the swim bladder so that they can adjust their depth in the water. And when you think these females have been losing a lot of weight, they've been spawning, losing the weight of those eggs, they've been evading predators, keeping off unwanted males, they are probably losing that weight, and they've come from the sea into fresh water. So constantly adjusting that bladder is probably what they're up to, and that's what we see when we see those bubbles coming out as well. Now, you can look out for these fish yourself, of course. Those cameras, all of our live cameras here in the New Forest and in Scotland, are running from 10 o'clock in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. And if you visit the website, you can find a little ID guide to all the salmon that we've seen on those cameras up there in the River Ness. What about that? An ID guide to burping salmon live in a river. Top stuff. We're going to stay underwater now, and if you cast your mind back to Autumn Watch, we had a remarkable film about bob-tailed squid in Loch Carron, and it was made by an equally remarkable filmmaker, Andy Jackson. Very sadly, Andy has passed away, but he was working on other animals in that loch, and we've been very lucky to get access to the material that he'd gathered. So here is a story about a little superstar with a very special survival instinct.
A layer of ice spread across Loch Carron is a sure sign winter has arrived on the west coast of Scotland. The inflowing river water doesn't mix well with the loch's seawater, forming a layer on top which can freeze in winter, while the salty underlayer remains a balmy 7 to 8 degrees. These unique conditions make it the perfect winter warmer for a multitude of marine life. Including a 5-legged little superstar. These are brittlestars. The common brittlestar looks stunning in a wide variety of shapes and stripes, their central discs and long arms adding a touch of vibrant colour to the winter seabed. These brittlestars have a 2-centimetre central disc, with 5 long skinny arms radiating out. These fragile arms are covered in long bristles, which enable brittlestars to filter feed by capturing plankton and other food passing in the tide. Brittlestars tend to gather in fast-moving tidal channels, making dense mats on the seabed. In some places, up to 2,000 brittlestars can occupy a square metre. Arms aloft, like fans at a rock concert, they feed in the tide. However, with less daylight in winter and cooler water temperatures, plankton numbers fall, which means food is in short supply for the brittlestar. But these ordinary-looking stars have superhero survival skills. They have the ability to withstand the drop in temperature which slows down their metabolism and amazingly decreases their appetite. Winter is tough, and twice a month they face another challenge. Each new or full moon brings with it stronger tidal forces, turning the brittlestar's gentle filter-feeding current into a torrent. This is when the brittlestars call on their power of super strength. Like protesters against the tide, they link their many arms, sit tight, and anchor themselves as a huge mat to the seabed. The tight-knit carpet community ensures no star is swept away. While there's safety in numbers, large groups of brittlestars attract hungry predators. Many fish, including dragonets, crabs, and particularly the brittlestar's arch nemesis, their cousins, starfish and sunstar. The seven-armed starfish eats almost exclusively other starfish and urchins, particularly the common brittlestar. But brittlestars have another superpower: a brilliant sense of smell. Being able to detect hungry enemy stars nearby gives them a head start. Brittlestars are super sprinters, the fastest of all the stars, using a rowing motion to propel themselves away from their slower-moving, tube-footed cousins. Under attack, teamwork is abandoned, as it's every star for itself. And should one be caught, they have one last trick up their bristly sleeve. They can actually shed their arms as a means of escape, able to grow them back later on. Such an array of superpowers helps the brittlestar overcome all the odds stacked against them in winter. They may be small and look defenseless, but they are the true superstars of this loch.
Incredible to think those tiny little stars have so many superpowers, and I really must thank Andy's wife Jackie Daly for making that film possible. Now, you might remember back in Spring Watch we introduced you to Trevor the beaver. He's back, and I guess he's looking a bit like he's seen it all before, but he hopefully will oblige just one last time. I just thought it'd be a great chance to look at one of the superpowers I was talking about earlier, and that's the tail back here, this paddle-like tail, which stores all the fat and also is a propulsion mechanism. But it's not the only superpower, and the Cornwall Beaver Trust, the Cornwall Beaver Project, in fact, that was set up by the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and with Woodland Valley Farm, was a field experiment that was set up to measure one possible superpower of the beavers, and that is to manage floodwaters through a landscape. So, like I said, we were here back in spring, and we had an amazing opportunity to see the adults out and about. We got incredible views of them out in their enclosure in daylight because of the long days, bright days in spring. But we also got to see the kits, 3 of the kits that were born here in the spring, and we saw them on some of their very first forays out in their territory. So they bumped the numbers up here to 7 beavers. Now it's winter with the shorter, longer nights, the shorter days and longer nights. More of the activity is seen at dark, under the cover of darkness. And we've seen a whole lot of dam building behavior, but also we've seen those kids out playing, loads of social behavior. So it's really great to know that they are thriving. Now, beavers are famous for beavering away, and they are constantly making adjustments to their environment. So when I first got here a few days back, I had a chance. I went straight down to that enclosure to see just how busy those beavers have been since I was last here. So back in the spring, this was not here. This is a new beaver pond that's been created. Now, there was one night that we had a really big dump of rain, and the beavers got to work immediately at damming up the area, and we saw the first little signs. They'd pushed the mud to try and shore up the water. But now look how much work they have done. All along here, this ridge has been built up by mud being packed in and logs and sticks. And you can see where they're getting their material from when you look over here. Now, there's a couple of trees there. There's one there that looks, I tell you what, I'll put money that that's going to be going in the next 24 hours. That tree's going down. But you can see they're busy. They've got a little beaver plan. But over here, this is where you get to see how efficient they are. I mean, these look like clean machete cuts, except when you really rub your fingers along that, you can see the teeth marks there. And I tell you what, without even seeing the animals themselves, it's exciting enough just to see that evidence. So the Cornwall Beaver Project, like I said, was set up 4 years ago to measure the flow of the water, the Tresillian River that flows through the valley here. And they measured the difference before the beavers were introduced and after they were introduced. Now, after a lot of number crunching from Dr. Alan Puttock and the team at Exeter University, the results were published just a few weeks ago. And I tell you what, it's very timely with the widespread flooding that's happening all around the country at the moment. So what they found is at peak flood flow, the beavers here reduce the amount of water flowing through here by 60%. Now let's just think about that for a moment, because the village just a mile down here, downstream from here, Laddock, was very, very prone to flooding. And on a night like tonight, I imagine they'll be quite glad to know the beavers are up here doing their work, building their dams. Now, of course, the beavers don't know all of this. They do all this amazing dam building behavior, maintaining their territory for their benefit. And this is a sort of activity we saw just a few nights ago right here. This beaver pushing in that mud and expertly creating this habitat so they can get everything they need. They can access their food, their lodgings, and generally feel safe from predators by creating these beaver ponds. But it's these ponds that help to hold the water in during times of floods. The dams actually hold the water back, letting it seep out at a gentle trickle. But amazingly, when there's a drought, the very same dams help to retain the water. So plenty of benefits that these beavers are being proved to show that they give here and to the landscape in general. Now, later in the series, we're going to be looking at more of the benefits that beavers bring to the landscape, but we're also going to be looking at some of the challenges that we could face if we were to live with beavers again in Britain. So more about that later in the series, but for tonight, let's just marvel at these incredible animals, their superpowers, their engineering and sculpting skills that help to create and shape this landscape for their benefit, but also for ours. And I know that Mid-Wales has also been hit by lots of flooding in the last 24 hours. And Wales, Iolo, how are you getting on?
Well, Gillian, it has rained and it has rained and it has rained non-stop now for 48 hours. You see the Dovey has burst its banks, nothing visible there except the tops of hedgerows and trees. And I hope the farmers there managed to get their animals off. I'm sure they did. You can also see, still haven't got a brolly, BBC cutbacks, and I'm still sporting that very trendy drowned rat look. Now, you might not think it on a day like this, but January is actually a brilliant time to start learning your bird songs. Several birds are singing at this time of year. And when I was at home last week, we had a lovely mild morning and I could hear birds singing. And amongst them was my favourite, this one. Listen to this. Isn't that lovely? Song of a blackbird. And what I like about it, it's a common bird, we can all hear that, and when we hear it, it cheers us up. There's actually a handful of birds that sing throughout the winter, and two of them very common, very familiar birds. The robin, it's got to be everyone's favourite bird. It's got to be everyone's favourite bird, and of course the winter song is slightly different to the spring song. Look at that, I love robins. And one of our smallest birds, but one of our noisiest as well, is the wren. Wrens are singing at this time of year. Now, why? Well, they're not doing it for fun. They're doing it to establish and hold a territory, because that territory in winter has to hold enough food for those birds to see it all the way through from October, November through till about February, March time. And it's not about being loud and proud. There's no point going up the top of the tree and singing away. There are no leaves, and the likelihood is you'll be eaten by a sparrowhawk. It's about singing consistently through the winter to keep other birds away. And you might think, well, you know, winter, it's a difficult time. You need all the energy. Surely singing is a waste of energy. Well, this is where the bird's superpower comes in. We as humans, we have two lungs and a muscular diaphragm. We breathe in and then we breathe out. But the birds, they have a system of air sacs. Most birds have 9 of them. You see some of them scattered through here. And when those air sacs are inflated, they hold 10 times more air than the bird's lung. But it goes further than that too. Now, bird bones, they're very specialist too. They're not quite hollow, they're more sort of honeycombed. That means that they're very light but very strong, and this allows the birds to fly, but it also, believe it or not, helps them to breathe and therefore to sing. Some of these air sacs are attached to some of the bones, like the humerus bones here. So when they expand into the bone itself. Isn't that absolutely remarkable? It's a little bit, think of it like this, it's a little bit like a bagpipe. You know when you've got your bagpipe, I've never used one, I've never played one, but you're blowing into it and the bag is under your arm, so you blow, and then when you've got to breathe in, you can squeeze the bag. And the birds go further again, they synchronise the expansion and the contraction of these air sacs with the beating of the wings or the running of the legs. See, and birds, absolutely brilliant. And there's one bird that sings throughout the winter that I've forgotten to tell you about, and that bird is the dipper. Now, dippers are quite common here on the streams and the rivers, and they sing throughout the winter. Why? Well, they're very specialist birds. They have to stay on the river because they feed almost exclusively on aquatic invertebrates and small fish. So they have to defend that territory all year round. Fantastic birds, I love dippers. And as you saw, we've got a lot of water here. It's flooded here. And the River Dillas, just down below me, that runs into the Dovey, well, that is a raging torrent. And there's usually a dipper on there. But for the past week, it's actually moved onto one of the ponds here at the Centre for Alternative Technology. Why? Well, it's because the current in the river is too strong. There's a lot of sediment in there, so visibility is really poor. But the dipper is getting exactly what it needs in that pond. There's no current there, the visibility is great, so it can get in the water after these aquatic invertebrates. It's been there for a week. I reckon with this weather, it'll probably be there for another month yet. And Chris, I have to say, you imagine, these birds, 9 air sacs. Now, if you had 9 air sacs, right, you could wail your dreadful Smiths songs to Meg day and night. Poor Meg.
Oh, heaven knows she'd be miserable now, wouldn't she, if that was going on? Goodness me.
Yeah, poor Meg. Poor Meg.
I used to sing to Megan. First song I ever taught you, Night to Remember by the Men They Couldn't Hang.
Yeah, I didn't learn to sing after that, did I?
Great song, though.
Yeah, true.
Great song. Our live cameras have been paying dividends down here in the New Forest. Look what we got last night. One of my favourite animals on planet Earth. Absolutely beautiful. A fox, red fox, up on the log here. Look at that, so statuesque, aren't they? Stunning, absolutely stunning. Look at that. Look at those little ears twisting backwards and forwards.
They are stunning, aren't they? And the thing you might notice whilst looking at this fox is that it's able to move its ears independently. Its left one moving anti-clockwise, its right one moving clockwise. They can move them 150 degrees, which is pretty amazing. And they've got dozens of tiny muscles within their ear that enable them to fine-tune their ear canals to pinpoint the location of prey, which is pretty amazing. They're like these discs getting all the sound in, which is really exciting. However, it goes a bit of a step further because they've got a superpower of their own, a sixth sense, if you like, and it's all to do with the Earth's magnetic field and how they perceive it, which is incredible. Now, it's quite hard to understand, and even scientists aren't entirely sure how it works yet, but we're going to try and do a bit of a demonstration.
OK, I've got a couple of masks here because one of us is going to have to be a fox and one of us is going to have to be a mouse. I'm feeling quite foxy, I've got to tell you.
You're feeling foxy?
I'm not feeling
like just because you've said that, I'm taking the fox.
Oh, don't be ridiculous.
Yeah, come on.
These are precious to me. I was given to them in a car park a little while ago. I'm going to be a mouse then. I'm just not going to squeak, all right?
There we go. So these lights here represent the Earth's magnetic field, and they lie in a northeasterly direction. Now, as a fox, I'm listening out for my mouse, and I'm hearing various different things, and I know roughly the direction I want to pounce in. So I'm going to jump this way, going across the magnetic field like this, but I'm unsuccessful. In fact, foxes that jump in any random direction only have about an 18% success rate. However, if my mouse moves around and I'm detecting where the sound changes...
I'm squeaking in the woodland night.
Scurrying, and I move this way and I face in a northeasterly direction, I can pounce, getting my prey. And in fact, it's so much more successful. It's 78% successful when they jump in a northeasterly direction.
It's remarkable.
It's remarkable. And how do they do it? Well, scientists have found a protein within the eye that's incredibly sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field. And they think that within the eye of the fox, it's able to determine a shadow within the iris that enables it to determine which direction it's facing. So if it's facing in a northeasterly way and the slope of the sound hitting the ears matches the slope of the magnetic field, then success rate is increased.
Stunning stuff, and it works. Look, here is a fox pouncing, not through the snow in this instance, but through the grass. Look at that.
Using those ears, using its full force to jump down.
I love this. Look.
Off it goes.
Bang, down onto that small mammal with pinpoint precision. Stunning stuff.
It's stunning stuff, and there's still a lot to learn about this. Of course, this is a sense that we don't have ourselves. It's hard for us to understand. It's easier if we're trying to learn about a physiological organ or something that we can perceive. We're, of course, limited to the restrictions of our own senses, which is why things like this get me so excited.
Yeah, indeed. That work was done 10 years ago. Not much of an update yet because of those difficulties, but what we do know is that foxes are the only animals that we know of so far that don't only use the Earth's magnetic field to sense direction, but also distance.
Incredible.
Fantastic stuff. But also not the only animals which are difficult to study. When it's dark like this, getting to grips with nocturnal animals can be terribly tricky. Owls are case in part. Now, using our live cameras and our infrared imagery, we're able to catch glimpses of owls. We've already seen some tawnies out here in the woodland, but really understanding how they use this environment to find their prey can be tricky. So we thought we'd rise to the task. What we got on board was some new high-tech equipment which basically transforms complete darkness into almost daylight. Mark Payne-Gill has such a camera, and using Hector and Lily, two tame birds owned by Lloyd and Rose Buck, we were able to explore exactly how they live in their respective environments. Take a look at this.
Night has fallen. Now, many believe these colder, shorter days bring longer periods of quiet and stillness, and of course, for some creatures, they probably do. Small mammals become less active, bedding down to save energy, reducing vital prey numbers for many of our owls. For two of our best-loved owls, the barn and the tawny, it can be an uphill struggle at this time of year. Enduring unfavourable weather with less food available, well, it takes all of their skills to survive. Tawny owls, like Hector here, like to hunt in dense woodland. It's a complex environment which poses certain challenges, especially in the inky black night. With our special high-tech camera, which can turn night almost into day, we can now clearly reveal how a tawny flies through such a challenging obstacle course. The tawny's torpedo-shaped body and short rounded wings allow for supreme agility and manoeuvrability. But a tawny owl's most impressive attribute is actually inside its head. It's got a magnificent memory. With every flight, these territorial birds build up mental maps of their wooded territories. And these allow them to precisely and swiftly navigate, avoid obstacles, and relocate their perching spots in almost complete darkness. Skills like these give Hector the edge in a woodland hunt. But out in the fields, Lily the barn owl has very different challenges to overcome. Even in dim winter light, barn owls are very easily seen. Their bright white plumage, which is an uncommon trait for a nocturnal animal, stands out against the dark night sky. Hunting in the open, Lily has no place to hide. So how does a white owl, so noticeable in the night, stalk and catch its prey? Well, those eyes are tuned for optimal night vision. But more importantly, she listens, using sound to detect the slightest movements or squeak in the undergrowth. Once she's on the hunt, silence is her secret weapon. The fringed edges of her flight feathers dampen the sound of each wing beat, enabling the barn owl to fly literally in silence. But when exposed by moonlight, just how does she close in on her target and remain unseen? Well, she doesn't, because barn owls pause momentarily above their prey. Her bright white feathers actually reflect the moon's glare, stunning prey in its tracks, just like a rabbit in the headlights. The short delay gives her just enough time to strike, hitting the ground with a force 15 times her body weight. A barn owl's apparent disadvantage becomes its deadliest weapon. But at this time of year, with prey thin on the ground, they're working overtime. Meanwhile, the tawny has a backup plan. You see, they won't just eat mice and voles. Their extraordinary diet can extend to birds, worms, beetles, and even rabbits in hard times. They can even turn their focus from woods to water, to feed on amphibians and fish. Thanks to Lily and Hector's skills, we can see that each owl is superbly adapted to thrive within its own ecological niche. Barn owls, the silent assassins of the open fields, and tawny owls, agile and adaptable masterminds.
Talk about superpowers. What incredible animals, amazing. Now, for Autumn Watch, I was based at RSPB Old Moor up in South Yorkshire's Dearne Valley. Now, the plan for Winter Watch was I was going to go back up there, but of course, all of that changed a few weeks ago. And of course, I'm aware as well tonight that a lot of South Yorkshire has been hit by flooding, so I thought it's really to go out with the team up there and all the folks up there. We managed to get one of our camera team up there a few weeks ago, before the lockdown, I should say, and we managed to get some really lovely views of one of the reserves up there during the winter. And the stories of the reserves in Yorkshire, the RSPB reserves, are one of my favourite. Just 30 years ago, this area was a post-industrial wasteland, but it's been transformed into these wildlife havens in a mosaic of wetland and grassland and meadows and reed beds. Now, to help manage this landscape naturally, the RSPB have recently introduced Konik ponies to one of the sites in the Dearne Valley. Now, Konik means horse in Polish, but don't be fooled by these beautiful, delicate, wintry colour palettes. These are extremely tough, extremely hardy animals. They're absolutely stunning, though, it's got to be said. Now, just to give you an idea of the size of these, they stand at 13 hands, which we reckon is a little over 4 feet tall, which is probably about as high as this. So this is up to the shoulder. So that's the kind of size pony they are. Pretty modest, but like I said, they are tough as old boots. So let's take a look at some of the features that make these ponies so very hardy. Now they've got these deep chests and strong legs that help them get through marshy, boggy, tough terrain, but they also thrive on poor grass, on poor nutrition, so they don't need supplementary feeding. They can actually do really well on this stuff. They're cold adapted animals as well. It means they can cope to temperatures down to -40 degrees. Some of the features that help them do this is they've got smaller ears, so it means they have less heat loss, but they also have these fluffy ear tufts that stop the snow from going in. And they've also got thick waterproof coats, unlike the domestic horses. So all this means they can stay out over the winter with very little intervention, which is just how they like it. So all this is great. They're perfectly adapted to surviving a Yorkshire winter, but how does this benefit the reserve? Well, it's their grazing and their feeding behavior that helps to create a habitat, areas of habitat known as blue zones. It all sounds very intriguing, but essentially blue zones are just habitat edges. Now this is kind of a no man's land between habitats. Now these zones become very dynamic as they're constantly being turned over by the Konik's grazing activity. It keeps the area open, it keeps it marshy, attracts the invertebrates, which of course attract the birds, like this beautiful snipe over here. So this is an incredible benefit. This natural management brought by these ponies allows for this variety of habitat for the benefit of all sorts of wildlife. And like I said, it's because of these super ponies, with their ability to overwinter, their hardy traits, means that they provide this absolutely vital wildlife haven in some of the most industrial, densely populated parts of the country. Now, I can't believe I'm going to say this because Iolo doesn't really need the encouragement, but from superpowers to a super Welshman.
Oh, you flatter me, Gillian. You really do flatter me. Thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. Now, X-ray vision. We've all heard about X-ray vision, haven't we? Do you know what I remember? Whenever I hear that, I remember when I was a very, very young lad, I saw a film, The Man with the X-ray Specs, and he could see through ladies' clothes at their underwear. I was quite traumatized by all of that, I have to say. But how about ultraviolet vision? Well, we humans, we don't have it, but birds do. And what it means is that ultraviolet light can penetrate through the lens in the eye of a bird. Let's compare human vision and bird vision. Here we are here. Now, humans have what they call trichromatic vision. So we can see in the red, green and blue wavelengths. Birds can also see in the red, green and blue wavelengths, but they also go up here into the ultraviolet wavelength as well. So what does that mean? How is that useful? Well, several ways, but in winter in particular, it's very useful for them to find food. Now let's have a look at sloes. Sloes, of course, they're common fruits. They grow in our hedgerows, and they're actually very valuable for a lot of our wildlife because they ripen late and they're available right through the winter. And they have an inbuilt mechanism that signals the birds when they're ready to be eaten. Although that redwing is really struggling there, they glow when they're seen in ultraviolet light. Now, it's not quite the same, but it's a little bit like, say, you or I go to the local grocers, we want to buy a banana. There's a green banana and there's a yellow banana. Now, we know the green banana isn't ripe, so we buy the yellow banana. So we thought with this ultraviolet light and sloes, we thought, does it work? And how does it work? Well, we thought, let's put it to the test. So we went out, we found some sloes, daylight, of course, beautiful, blue, purple fruits there hanging, good for making sloe gin. Put the light out, get the ultraviolet light on, and you see that they glow. How does it work? Well, they have a white, waxy bloom growing on the surface, and that reflects the ultraviolet light when it's ripe. Isn't that amazing? Because very useful to birds, because if you're flying along, you're hungry, you look down, you see the sloes. If you see them glowing, you know that they're ripe. Useful for the blackthorn, for the plant as well, because they want that fruit to be eaten, for the seed to be carried away. Fantastic. Chris and Megs, my sympathy is with that poor redwing. Not only did it take a long time for him to get that sloe down, but I happen to know that the stone inside a sloe is pretty big, and probably in the next few hours that has got to come out the other end. Poor redwing.
Yeah, poor
redwing.
redwing.
Mind you, after last night's missel thrush with that vociferous turd and the idea of fecal jewellery, we could be on to something here, Iolo. We're working on it, that's for sure. But of course, many of those sloes are gathered from our hedgerows, aren't they?
Yeah, but they're not the only berries at this time of year which are really important. Berries provide such important nutrition for our birds, and many of them of course grow in hedges, and we know that up to 80% of our woodland bird species rely on hedges for food.
So I went out to investigate a hedge just over here, actually about 100 metres away the other day, to explore all of the virtues of this very important wildlife habitat. A hedgerow is essentially a man-made linear strip of woodland, but it's a very important resource for wildlife, particularly during the winter. Let's take a look at this particular hedgerow here, and I've got to say this is fabulously unkempt. Most of those hedgerows which are flailed to within an inch of their life don't provide a great number of resources for wildlife, but a tangle of brambles and hawthorn and hazel like this is fantastic. So how does it work? Well, firstly, it links habitat together. This hedgerow is linking the woodland here with more woodland on the other side. It's providing a safe corridor for lots of species to get from A to B. Now, in the case of bats, they're simply using it as a physical entity to navigate, but lots of other animals will be using it to get shelter. You see, they won't want to be moving through the open field here where they're exposed to predators. No, they want to be sneaking through this overgrown tangle. And look, down here, you can see that something's been making its way in. Badgers and foxes, maybe muntjac deer as well. But aside from that shelter for travelling, they're also shelter per se. I mean, hedgehogs are going to love to go through this grass and make their winter nest in the security of the base of that hedgerow. Ditto mice, and of course, during the springtime, this will be filled with all sorts of birds' nests. But it isn't spring, is it? It's winter at the moment. And aside from shelter, what do most animals need at this time of year? What's in invariably short supply? Food. And hedgerows can be an incredibly important larder for winter wildlife due to all of the seeds and fruits that those tree and shrub species provide.
So important, all of those berries providing so much nutrients at this time of year. And there is essentially a pecking order, if you'll excuse the pun, when it comes to taking berries off the trees. Of course, different berries come out at different times, and it's to ensure that there's enough food to go on throughout winter. So let's have a look a bit at that pecking order. Now, in the early part of the season, the birds will be feeding a lot on blackberries and elderberries in August to October. Then, of course, rose hips come out, and they'll be taking advantage of all those beautiful red berries off the trees, and then rowan too. And of course, later on in the season, there'll be holly, there'll be ivy, which will provide massive amounts of nutrients that they'll be taking advantage of too.
Yeah, and that's a key point. It's not just which fruits are fresh, it's what reward the birds can get from them, because they're making very precise choices. This is a matter of life and death. Everything they put in their beaks has got to count.
Yeah.
That's the question.
It does. Funny you should say that, because I happen to have a bit of an avian pick and mix out in front of me here. I've got all the berries that a bird could possibly wish for in my berry stand.
Your berry stand?
I do. I've got blackberries,
yeah.
I've got hawthorn, blueberries, sloe. I've got anything the bird could dream of.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fantastic.
Okay, look, listen,
Yeah.
I imagine I'm a blackbird and I'm coming to your berry pick and mix and things like that. I want to know what you're going to offer me in return for my endeavour.
Okay.
If I choose a fruit. Go on then.
Well,
I'm going to have a early season, nice and ripe, easy to find, blackberry.
A blackberry. Well, you'd have to eat about 100 blackberries to get 50 calories.
What?
Yeah, so it's a lot of blackberries for a small bird to eat to get that energetic reward.
That's too many blackberries. It's way too many blackberries. There's too much water in them. And besides, the blackbirds would get the pips stuck in their beaks, you know, trying to get them out.
Yeah.
OK, blackberry's not so good then. I'll eat this one in the meantime. What about after that? What can you offer me in terms of, I don't know, vitamins?
Vitamins? What about a rose hip? So you could eat 30 rose hips and you'd get the equivalent amount of vitamin C as you would if you were eating 40 oranges.
40
so just
oranges.
with 30 of these, you'd get the equivalent vitamin C of 40 oranges, which is amazing.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's a lot.
The thing about rose hips, though, they are one of those fruits that gets better through the season because frost tenderises them. When they first appear, I don't know what these are like. Yeah, no, these are all of this. These are squidgy. Look at all that squidge coming out there. Look at all the squidge coming out. You see, that is absolutely prime blackbird tasty orange material.
I don't offer any old berries.
No,
I mean, come on.
but earlier in the season it would have been rock hard. Now the frosts that we've had have tenderised them. OK, go on. What's the best thing on your table for a hungry blackbird in winter?
I would go for the ivy. So if a blackbird were to eat the pith of the ivy, gram for gram, there is as many calories in this as there is a chocolate bar. 230 calories in your average chocolate bar, and gram for gram, it's the same as ivy.
That's remarkable, isn't it?
It's a lot of calories, so a lot of energy.
And again, we've got to say it because we always say it. I mean, ivy's such an important plant. You know, if you tear this off of your trees, you tear this off of the buildings, you're taking away all of those berries, which are so important. Gram for gram, the same calorific value as chocolate, which I can't eat because it's probably not vegan, but never mind. Amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Oh, God, who would have thought that from those ivy berries? Now, it is a very wild and windy night down here, but that's an unsubstantiated statement. It's a subjective opinion of the weather. What we need is a qualified opinion of that weather, and we're going to get that from Nick Miller at the BBC Weather Centre, who's telling us all about this winter so far and its impact on wildlife.
Well, this winter hasn't been too harsh for our wildlife so far, but there has been at least some snow across many areas, and all parts of the UK have recorded lower overnight temperatures than they did last winter. Now, the coldest, snowiest weather has been across the north, and that's led to the movement of some birds further south to less harsh conditions, such as the widgeon. It's a summer breeding bird mainly in Scotland, but it has been unusually spotted at the BTO's Nunnery Lakes Reserve in Norfolk. Now, this winter's also turning into quite a wet one, and there's more heavy rain out there at the moment from this low-pressure storm Christophe. Windy, flooding rain, and flooding for ground-feeding birds isn't good news because they have to move further afield to find the food they need. And could this winter still be about to deliver some very cold weather? Well, let me take you to the stratosphere, where high above the Arctic at this time of year, we find very cold air, held in place by strong westerly winds, the polar vortex. Now, sometimes those winds can weaken, the cold air collapses downwards, warms suddenly, and that's called sudden stratospheric warming. Now, sometimes when that happens, our jet stream can weaken, mild Atlantic air is blocked from reaching us, and we find ourselves in a prolonged spell of very cold weather like the beast from the east. Now, recently there has been some sudden stratospheric warming. Will it lead to some very cold weather? It's still far from guaranteed. But whatever the weather, there's still plenty of winter visitors out there for us to see, such as the redwing. Often you don't know they're there until they all rush out of a holly tree as you walk by, where they're feeding on the berries. And the larger fieldfare, a beautiful bird. Binoculars best for these. They do not like you getting too close. And don't just look, listen too. More birds are starting to sing right now, and even what seems like the coldest mornings, you can hear the great spotted woodpecker drumming, announcing its territory. Because even though this seems like to us the longest, darkest of winters, they know spring is around the corner, and it will come for us all.
Nick, it will come. Well, it doesn't feel like it's coming very quickly tonight. And now I'm going to be living in fear of sudden stratospheric warming. That's the last thing we're going to need to finish off our winter, I've got to say. But let's move on now to our mindfulness moment. And typically, these little cameos of a place where we just listen to and engage with nature with no commentary and no music are all about calming ourselves. Well, tonight's is slightly different. It's about exhilaration. It's about unimaginable force and energy. It's about the power of the winter storm. Tumult and tempest. But there is also something quite therapeutic about it. When you can watch those waves from a safe distance, the sheer power, the primal power of nature is awe-inspiring, of course. Very sadly, we're running out of time, but we'd like to show you a couple of things that we have spotted on our live cameras whilst we've been on air. This is the first thing, up on the banks of the Ness. Look at this. It's not, let's hope it's not one of our star salmon, one of those in our ID guide. But it's wonderful to see an otter there munching away on that fish. Sensational stuff. We've also had mammal action here as well. Just over here in the hedgerow we saw this. Yes, there we are, a little wood mouse. Look at the length of the tail as it comes in there and pinches a nut and takes it away to cache it. Well, very sadly, that's all we've got time for tonight. We hope that you've enjoyed some of our animals with their super senses, of course. Those salmon, those foxes, the way they pounce using the Earth's magnetic field. Truly astonishing. We'll be back with more fantastic things from the natural world tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. What have we got coming up? Well, from down in Kent, we're investigating the Ore Marshes. It's a wetland area where in winter there are loads and loads of winter visitors, wildfowl and waders, all that sort of stuff.
And I'll be looking at some of the incredible insects and spiders that live and overwinter in a dark tunnel here at the Centre for Alternative Technology.
And I'll be looking at ducks in the city and seeing how these beautiful oriental birds are making themselves at home in our cities.
Mandarin ducks, is it me, or are they just a little bit overdressed, a little bit gaudy? You'll be able to decide tomorrow. If you can't wait until 8 o'clock, remember our cameras are live from 10 a.m. in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. If you do get any pictures, please send them in to Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget our wildlife watch list. It's available on our website. Apart from that, we'll see you tomorrow night at 8. Good night.